Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. Thank you for coming. I'll tell you that I'm going to stand. This is Charles Jackson here, and we're going to introduce everyone in a minute. But if we're trying to do some kind of innovative things with respect to how we allow folks to engage with us on this. So we've got some cameras. We're broadcasting this via live stream off of our internet, which means that we have to stay in the camera shot. So I'm trying to stay within these two little pieces of paper right here and try not to shift my feet too much. So thank you for coming. We're here to discuss some revisions that we at the city have put together with some input thus far from some stakeholders. Most of what we have to discuss is going to address some different type of commercial pet service activity. We have some other revisions that we're making to Chapter 6 that range the spectrum from purely administrative. We need to consolidate some language, or there's permits that haven't been issued in a number of years that don't make sense to have anymore, to some kind of policy statements that we feel are important to articulate that we hope would motivate some action at the state level. So I just want to point out that I think everyone that is in the room now knows that there's a sign-in sheet in the back. We'd love it if you would fill that out for us so that we can stay in contact. If we don't already have your email address, you're not forced to provide any information you're not comfortable providing. But if you'd like to receive some additional information as we move forward via email, then we're more than happy to communicate with you that way, but we can't do without your information. So with that, I'm going to pause and kick it over to Charles to lead us on.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next slide. Yeah, that'd be great.
So what we thought, we've got this room until 8:30, and of course everyone's free to enter and leave as you see fit. What we'd like to do is to kind of get through this material as thoroughly, but also as quickly as we can, so that everyone understands it, but also so that we leave as much time as possible at the end for questions and answers. So what we've done is I've asked my colleague Alex up here to put me on a clock. So I must get done with the presentation in 20, we have to cover everything that's on these slides in 25 minutes. And then I have to stop. He's going to give me a time mark. And then we're going to turn it over so that that still gives us around about an hour and a half for Q&A. Does that sound okay? Okay. All right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, from the City of Houston, we have Greg Daminoff, who is an Assistant Director, and he's the Director of Park. We have Chris Newport, who did our introduction today. He's the Council Liaison and Public Information Officer. We have Candace Gambrell, right? She is an Assistant City Attorney. We have myself, who's an Awesome Division Manager with the City of Houston. We have Chris Glasser. Jared is not here today. He's actually in Yellowstone, right, enjoying the scenery. He's an ACO Manager at Park. And we have Ashton Ribbett, who's actually going to be doing a lot of our interaction online with tweeting and whatnot. She's here helping us as well. Next slide. So today we're going to cover a little bit about the background, right? How we got to this point. We're going to talk about the review of major changes, all right? Chris is going to go ahead and conclude, and then we're going to save as much time as possible for Q&A. Next slide. So I want to tell you a story. In 2009, the Administration of Regulatory Affairs took over Park, and we had a lot of work to do, and we got right to work. We immediately recognized that there were changes that needed to be made to the ordinance. In 2010 and 2011, we met with City Legal, and we began to meet with stakeholders, right? Some of you were at those meetings, and we started getting input, but we still had a lot of work to do at Bark, right? So in 2012, we stabilized Bark, and we got our processes, we hired good people, and we said, hey, we need to refocus on this city ordinance, all right? So again, we got back with City Legal, and now here in 2013, here we are, and we want to get the maximum amount of input from our constituents, right? We don't want to present a substandard product to the council, right? We're not going to take this until we get enough feedback from everybody, and that's why we're holding this meeting today. Next slide. So today we're only going to cover major changes, right? there are minor changes, and you'll see, you can go online, some of you have already looked at the ordinance through and through. You'll see language was changed for readability, right? Sometimes we change the word kennel to commercial pet service facility throughout the document. I didn't notate that. We're not going to cover every single little change. We're going to talk about the things that are going to impact you, all right? And so we're going to start right now. Chris has 25 minutes. Let's see if he can get it done, all right? I'm going to try to stand in the camera frame and not move too much. Chris, it's all yours.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, so as you can see, we're starting 6-1. 6-1 contains the definitions for most of the terms and phrases that we use throughout chapter 6. We've recommended that the definitions in a number of cases be modified, either because the prior definition of a term, for instance, what bark is, was either inappropriate, it was too restrictive, or it wasn't expansive enough. So we're proposing that Bureau is a moniker that is used to define different organizational units in the health department. Park isn't in the health department anymore, so what we propose is that the definition just be referred to the division in the Administration and Regulatory Affairs Department that's responsible for animal shelter, animal control, and adoptions. We've made a number of other changes. You can see here that we carry this through. This change right here, animal shelter, you're not going to see the animal shelter or the animal center. It's going to be called bark throughout the thing. That's just going to consolidate it, made it a little bit easier to read. Commercial pet service facility replaces the term dog kennel. That's an example of a term that was too restrictive. We know from anecdote that a person did not apply for the prior kennel permit or kennel license because they were a groomer. And they thought, well, I'm not a kennel, so I don't need to apply for that. So we have the more expansive term, commercial pet service facility. Excellent. And here's the definition of commercial pet service facility. The provisions of what were the kennel license are really kind of the most extensive and I think most material that we're making here, and also what impacts the most businesses in the area. So you can see what the definition is now. The prior definition of kennel was essentially a kennel means a place where more than 4 dogs are kept, more or less. So, well, 3 or more, yeah. So that's an arbitrary number 1, and we've just described why that wasn't an adequate description of the phrase. The intent of that was to address commercial pet service facility, meaning you can read this, I'm not going to read it for you, but you note that essentially what this means is, are you in the business of caring for animals in some way? It could be as a groomer, as a doggy daycare, as a boarding home, that type of thing. And then we do not include in that definition commercial breeders, veterinarians, or vet hospitals, because we treat those commercial breeders are covered in a different section of the code, and then veterinarians are subject to different licensing requirements. So there's an avenue that already exists to address issues that may arise if animals under their care aren't being cared for adequately. So we didn't feel that it was necessarily appropriate, or it was unnecessary really, to add a layer of bureaucracy over what can already be an effective means to address a shortfall. So the term breeder here, what we've essentially done is we've left the definition of commercial breeder essentially the same, but we've added a term non-commercial breeder, which you can read right here. We've added this definition for extreme weather conditions because that didn't exist before. So we thought it was appropriate to lay out what that means. It's a pretty technical definition of the phrase. So the National Weather Service says, via one of these types of things, if they declare one of those things, that's extreme weather condition. So section 6-11, milch goats, this is an example of a permit or license that we recommend that we do away with because we haven't issued these permits. Milch goat's been like 10 years, I think, Chris?
Yeah.
We have another section, there's wild animals. We haven't issued, that existed to grandfather prior owners when the revision was made in '97. So that was so long ago that those animals aren't alive anymore, so it's just not needed. So it's either there's not a demand for that type of permit, or it's infeasible to enforce, so we just recommend that we do away with it. 6-17, there currently exists a requirement that any dog that we need to quarantine subsequent to a bite, that it be tattooed. Microchipping, tattooing is an antiquated means of identifying an animal. We have microchipping technology that's come a long way, so we've suggested that we substitute microchipping for tattooing. Section 6-26 defines, you can see that we're defining ownership. We've let that section be informed a lot by what exists in state law. What we're going for, the intent of adding this definition of ownership is really, and there's some interplay between this section and then what we have in 6-22. But what we're trying to say is that in those instances where a conflict arises between someone that's providing care for an animal, say they're feeding, they've got a dog, it's a neighborhood dog. They provide food for it, they provide water for it. Perhaps it sleeps under their house, or maybe they've erected some type of shelter for it. In the event that that animal ultimately causes a problem with respect to public health and safety in that neighborhood, which means that if we get a complaint about there's an aggressive dog on my street and the person at 123 Main Street is feeding the animal and causing it to be there, then this provides us a mechanism to address that specific issue, more or less. 6-22 that I was referring to earlier basically says when it's added, and you can, I forgot to mention, guys, you've got two different resources here. You've got the PowerPoint, and if you don't have it, they're on the back table. You've got the PowerPoint, and then there's this Excel spreadsheet that kind of says what number the revision is, the section that we're revising, what's being revised and why. So 6-22 essentially adds, there was some vulnerability before for folks that participate in the trap neuter release program that we began back in 2007, and then really reinvigorated it in earnest in 2010. And essentially, if you were it's the causing a congregation section. So if you were feeding stray cats or stray dogs, causing a congregation because of the feeding, then folks that participate in the TNR program, which we want to encourage and grow, we're technically in violation of that section. So we added some language that essentially says, you know, it provides an affirmative defense. If you're participating in a TNR program as approved by the director, and it applies to dogs and cats as well. And I can read the text for you if you like. If you've got questions during the Q&A, I'm happy to amplify on that. We've added another section. I think there was some concern about section 6-7, just to backtrack a little bit, which speaks to injured, wild, and then we added more feral animals. That section, the intent of that section is to provide some flexibility to our animal control officers to be able to take action with respect to feral hogs. We've received an increasing number of complaints, really up in Kingwood, about feral hogs interacting with constituents more. You may have seen some news reports recently about that. We received a couple of emails saying that there was some confusion about whether or not that was applying to feral cats, whether or not this was jeopardizing the TNR program. Absolutely not the intent. So what we have now in the new draft version of the ordinance online is we went ahead and clarified and said for the purposes of that section, 6-7, this does not include dogs or cats. Okay? All right, so now that I've backtracked quite a bit, we'll go ahead. So in several instances, we've made reference to the building code that essentially says if you're going to have an enclosure for horses or for cattle, the number of which that exist within the city limits is absolutely shocking. then you need to reference the building code and make sure that the structure that you're providing for shelter complies with whatever might exist in the building code. 6-38, rooster complaints are essentially the #1 complaint that we get for animal noise in the city of Houston. Go ahead, Alex. 657, we covered that already. 6-90, there used to be this section that allowed veterinarians to issue permits. We've removed that as we moved the pet licensing function in-house late last year. And veterinarians aren't required to purchase any additional software or incur any additional costs. If they want to sell a license, they're not required to do that. We've added 2 sections towards the end of the ordinance that are really designed to give our animal control officers some new tools to address things that they see out on the road and that we can't enforce really. Right now, we either have the decision to write a citation. Say, for example, someone in my neighborhood is violating the leash law on a regular basis, or someone in my neighborhood is allowing their dog to run at large on a regular basis, or someone in my neighborhood, these are all complaints that we get hundreds of. Someone in my neighborhood is allowing their dog to run out and it produces waste in my yard. Right now, what we have is our animal control officers are either forced to, not that they have all that much capacity to respond to these types of complaints anyway, as opposed to bite cases, but they have the ability right now to either write a citation. They can only write a citation if they witness a person doing one of those things in order for it to stand up in court. Otherwise, there's not much point in our officers writing a citation. So we've created two new categories, which we'll get into later. Aggressive dog, which is really a bridge between you have an animal that you have knowledge of posing a risk to public health or safety because it has bitten someone. That dog can be declared an aggressive dog. Public nuisance dog is a dog that we receive a number of complaints. There's a substantiated pattern of behavior where it's really the owner allows that animal. They're not being responsible, allowing that animal to run around at large through the neighborhood, that type of thing. We can declare that animal a public nuisance dog. So that's a long way of giving you some context to say that subsequent to either one of those declarations, if either one of those animals, class of animal, and again really it's kind of owner, is found to be running at large, then there's elevated penalties for allowing that animal to run at large. It's very similar to what already exists for the dangerous dog determination, which is provided for at the state. We didn't have anything between dangerous dog and just pure nuisance. 6-120, you can see that we've basically stated that non-commercial breeding is prohibited. What where we're going with this is we think that there are plenty of animals in the city of Houston. We have thousands and thousands at large great pets. I don't think we need to be adding to the population anymore. If you would like to engage in the act of breeding animals, be it purebred animals or not, whatever, if you'd like to engage in the commercial activity of breeding animals, we prefer that you didn't do that and that you would just send everyone to BARK and the other shelters that we have across the country. But if you would like to do so, you're still allowed to do that. We haven't changed any of those provisions. You just need to get a commercial breeder's permit, license rather. The intent of adding section 6-120 is to say that if you're not going to engage in the commercial activity, you don't need to allow your animal to breed. We've got enough animals. We've got enough sources of animals at low to no cost, depending on the weekend and how many animals we've taken into park. There are plenty of avenues to go get it, so we don't need folks breeding the family the two family pets to try to give it to other family members when there's other avenues. Because ultimately what happens is that there's not 1 or 2 puppies per litter, there's 6 or 7. And it turns out that that's pretty difficult to place those animals. And what happens too often is that those animals are brought to bark in styrofoam coolers, in paint buckets, in baskets, whatever. That imposes a real cost on bark. It imposes a real cost on taxpayers, and we think that it ought not be lawful anymore. So there it is. Section 6-122. So this is where we get into the commercial pet service facility license. Go ahead, Alex. So 6-122 articulates the type of information that we would like to receive from applicants for this type of permit. It's essentially, please tell us who you are, where you are, any information about your corporate entity, basic contact information that we need to be able to get in touch with you. 123, the current ordinance requires an inspection prior to being issued a kennel license. Thankfully, what we have is we know that there are a vast number of great operators of these types of businesses. We have found that the inspection was largely unnecessary because our officers go out to the facility and they find a great operation that's clean, has adequate food, water, and shelter for all the animals. So we're recommending that we do away with that. Because what we want to do is focus on nuisance-based enforcement. Essentially what we have, guys, is we have technical requirements that force a number of really good operators to comply with, they're technically in violation of the law, although we know, because we haven't received complaints about those activities, that they're great operations, they're not imposing a burden on their neighbors. So what we want to move to, rather than have our resources responsible for focusing on an area that's this large, which includes a number of people that are doing great things every day and we don't need to be concerned with. We'd like to move to a complaint-driven process that allows to focus our limited resources on those rare occasions when people have proven that maybe they need some help or encouragement to operate in the correct way, or perhaps they've proven that they ought not be in this business anymore. 6-124, that's basic. That's a basic provision from other licensing and permitting provisions that the city has in a number of different things. If your contact information changes, please update us. Go ahead, Alex. We've implemented another thing that's very common in various other licensing and permitting activities, which is the ability in those instances when someone has shown that perhaps they need some reinforcement or perhaps they've demonstrated that they cannot operate the facility in an appropriate way. We have 2 ways to address that. We can suspend the license, and there's due process proceedings and protections that are articulated to do that via a hearing officer process. And then we can revoke a license. And there are specific thresholds that must be met before that can occur. And there's also due process protections that apply to that revocation as well. So what we essentially have is rather than have 2 arbitrary standards, which is 100-foot minimum distance requirement. You must stay 100 feet away from the nearest point of human habitation. And that number 4, if you have 4 or more dogs, then you have to get a kennel license, both of which are arbitrary, either of which can be, we could find any evidence to show that we need to have those standards in place because science says that if they're closer than that, then the risk of infection or disease transmission or what have you goes down. So they're purely arbitrary numbers. We're proposing that we do away with that and establish what are essentially what we think. We think that anyone that is in this business would agree are kind of non-negotiables from their customer's point of view. That is essentially, you must keep your animals in a way that provides basic food, water, shelter. You cannot, you must not exhibit cruel treatment towards the animals that are under your care. You must preserve the habitat in a way that it doesn't foster the transmission of disease or risk the other client animals that are under your care. And then finally, we have a provision that you need to structure your facility in such a way so that it doesn't impose a burden on your neighbors in terms of the noise that's produced. Go Go ahead, Alex. I've stated, and we can go into more detail about this in Q&A if you like, just make notes. I think Lisa's going to have some questions probably. Suspension is different from a revocation, which I've addressed. The suspension, we have the ability, and we've got some standards on our end. If we find a reason to suspend the license and a hearing officer in the municipal courts department affirms that recommendation, then once that, whatever led to that suspension has been addressed, the business owner can notify us that they've addressed that issue and we'd like a reinspection. We have to respond within 3 days, I believe, after we receive that notice to come out and reinspect, and then that suspension can be lifted. Revoking a license, I think I've covered in detail. Go ahead, Alex. We have to provide, we have standards that we have to meet. We cannot arbitrarily come out and shut down any businesses. We don't have a history of doing that, and thankfully we don't have, we've got great operators. We don't have a number of complaints that lead us to believe that we're going to have to use these provisions very extensively, but prior to us revoking a license, we must provide the person with written notice, which includes the date and time that a hearing will be held. That's the due process protection that I was talking about. Folks can call witnesses, they can issue statements, they can have legal representation there and whatnot. Yeah, I think I covered it there. Go ahead, Alex. Hearing officer has to present written findings. So there's a written record of what was determined. Hearing officer can do several things with respect to the suspension also. They can say, no, this recommendation isn't justified. They can say, yes, this recommendation is justified, but I think something less than revocation is appropriate. It could be a warning, it could be a suspension. Or, yes, I agree and affirm that the revocation recommendation is justified, and we're going to revoke the license. Okay, Alex? 100-foot rule, I think I just finished describing, arbitrary, and we recommend that we do it. The bottom line there is that we are not interested in, our animal control officers have plenty to do responding to the hundreds of calls that they get for service each and every day. We are not interested in interfering with the business activities of folks that have great relationships with their customers because they provide a great service. Not interested. If we need to take some action because we're made aware of substandard conditions that may exist, then we've got some tools that allow us to do that. But that's essentially where we stop. You can see impoundment here. On every first impoundment, we're making a recommendation that the unaltered animal be altered. Again, we've got a vast number of stray animals that are around, and animals will run at large or leave the property oftentimes because of the mating instinct, and then they get discombobulated, they can't find their way home, and whatnot. So we're trying to address kind of what may be a root cause of them running at large in the first place. Please.
There is currently a requirement for sterilization mandatory for cats. It's been that way for years and years on the first impoundment and second impoundment for dogs. So we're not really changing it a lot. We're just making people more aware of it, and we're going to be enforcing it.
Right. And then here, 6-141, this is one of those policy statements that we think, this is really codifying what's already in practice. We have pretty rigorous, I'm going to beg Alex to be able to go over time, and I'll beg your indulgence just a little bit, but I'm only going to ask for 4 more minutes. We have a pretty solid practice. We use this software called Rapidware at BAR. When folks come through, we have the ability to check for different types of offenses. The point that we're making here is that there's been some legislation at the state legislature the last couple of sessions that we think is valuable and that we support, and that's an animal cruelty registry. It hasn't gotten out of session the last couple of times, so what we're hoping is that we're going to go ahead and codify what is current practice. We're going to beef up our record keeping a little bit so that hopefully we can provide to the state some precedent that the largest municipality in the state thinks that this is important. They've taken their own local step to do something about this. So we're kind of clearing the way and treading into the water first on that issue, hopefully to provide some social proof that others can support too. And Senator Whitmar's been hoping to get some movement and get it done in the next session. And that's essentially, if you've been convicted of cruelty, you can't shop with us at all, and it's an offense. A separate offense. Dangerous, aggressive, and public nuisance dogs. I think that I've gone over this in some detail, but aggressive. So it's important to note that these aren't arbitrary designations. We have to receive a complaint first that must be substantiated by a follow-up investigation. But an aggressive dog would be one that has attacked or bitten any person or other animal without provocation on 2, not 1. Not threatened, but not bitten, but bitten someone or another animal on 2 previous occasions, and we have the ability to document those things, and that it's displayed aggressive tendencies that would cause the reasonable person, which is a standard that's used a lot in law, this reasonable person standard, and in law enforcement, to fear, essentially, that they could be subject to attack.
And I think we covered most of all this already, Chris.
Dangerous dog, this is, guys, largely the same, what we have on the books already. The dangerous dog we essentially take from the state law. We've made some minor tweaks to it, but the dangerous dog is a process that's provided for at the state level, and this is largely the same. I wouldn't say that it's changed materially.
We just added a few more requirements for animals.
Right. Here we get into public nuisance dogs. So this is an animal, really, again, an owner, admittedly the owner that is causing the nuisance. It's allowing their animal to impose a burden on their neighbor who doesn't get any enjoyment of that animal to themselves. So what this allows us to do, for example, if an animal currently runs at large all the time because the property owner refuses to fix their fence, we really don't have a way to address that directly. So what we've suggested is implementing this public nuisance designation, which is again subject to review and the due process protections. If your animal is barking and keeping your neighbors up all night and on multiple occasions, not isolated incidents, but on multiple occasions, and you have shown that you refuse to take action to mitigate that nuisance, then we can utilize this new tool. If you refuse to fix your fence and your dog continues to get out through the hole in the fence, we can use this to encourage you to fix your fence, essentially. That's it in a nutshell. And again, we've got hearing officer due process protections. I think that's important to emphasize. Attacks domestic animals. So if a dog continues to get out and attack neighborhood cats or community cats, that type of thing. You guys can read these for yourselves. I think that's pretty straightforward and understood. We can cover it in more detail. 163, we've covered dangerous dogs again. That's essentially stating that you can't bring a dangerous dog that's been declared dangerous in another municipality into our jurisdiction. Did I get that right, Chris? Okay. We can go through this.
Yeah, I think you covered all this, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay. Conclusion.
Yeah, so I think Chris did a fantastic job. I might suspend his license for going over, right? I might let him keep it, I'm not sure yet. But the park is focused on nuisance-based enforcement. I mean, that's something that we really wanted to push, right? You're not interested in shutting down your business. You've built customer bases, you've built a business, and we want you to be able to operate that. We care about the care of the animals, right? We're not interested in arbitrary rules. And that's what talks about point 2 of this new ordinance being business friendly, right? We want to build that relationship with you as well, right? I don't want to send Officer Glassow to inspect your facility and to shut you down for some arbitrary rule or reason. And again, with the 100-foot rule going away. And again, the park is dedicated to the health and welfare of the animals, right? And that's what we wanted to push with this ordinance. You know, with all the language about TNR, the language about you taking care of your animals that are under your custody, and even constituents being responsible with the animals in their care, making sure that there is no non-commercial breeding going on, right? You're breeding puppies and selling them, and you don't have a license to do that, right? We want to discourage you from having puppies. We have plenty of bark. If you doubt it, come spend a week with me, right? I promise you I can show you plenty of puppies, kittens, dogs, and cats. And we just want to thank everybody for being here, right? Ordinance changes aren't necessarily very sexy, right? But what is really important, I mean, Chris might think so, but what's really important is that we get your feedback and your input. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm the smartest person in this room. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I have all the right answers, right? Your input is really important to us, and your feedback is really important to us, okay?
So I just want to say a couple more things besides thank you, Charles. We do have, I should have done this at the beginning, so I'll ask for the forgiveness of the folks that I'm about to recognize.
I'm really going to suspend his license now, guys.
We've got a couple of representatives here from two great council members. Councilmember Jack Christie has a representative here, and Councilmember Melissa Noriega has a representative here. They're in the back of the room. Am I missing? I don't think yeah. So Toy Ramirez is here from Councilmember Noriega's office, and Jonathan Ford is here from Councilmember Jack Christie's office. There are a couple of things that we didn't cover in this, and I'd just like to cover some mechanics about what we can do moving forward. So we've placed, there are 66 pages of draft ordinance that I think everyone in this room received a link to or knows how to access that link. It's in the current laws and codes link on the left-hand side. If you follow that, you click the current codes link up at the top, and then you can see the Chapter 6 draft. There's 66 pages of it. It shows everything that's been struck through, the language that will remain the same, and then the underlined language shows what's suggested to be added. We have the two documents here. What we're going to do, we're catching video of this right now. We're going to post this on our YouTube page after the fact later on. So if you want, if you know someone that couldn't be here tonight, we'll send out some communications emphasizing all of this, but this will all be available to everyone. And I think as we make revisions, if there are some suggestions that we think are great ideas and ought to be adopted, then we'll just go ahead and make those updates to that section of the webpage so everybody can see that. And we'll try to stay consistent with updating everybody. There were a couple of revisions that we didn't describe that I wanted to just touch on. I already described the areas where we were worried that we might unintentionally expose folks that participate in TNR to technical violation of the law. So see section 6-22, the language that was added there. Clarifying that section 6-7 doesn't apply to feral cats, which is a little bit redundant. If you look at, we recommended that the definition of feral cat be modified in the definitions section. It's wild, domesticated, untamed domestic cat. And there was also, we made a suggested revision to enable more people, if their animal is involved in a bite, to be able to quarantine that animal at home. Right now, we have to quarantine too many animals because we've got the provision that states that essentially if you don't have a city license before your dog bites someone, you don't have the opportunity to quarantine that animal at home. So what we've changed is to say that if your animal has a rabies certificate at the time that a bite or an exposure occurs, and you get your animal licensed with us subsequent to the bite, but if you have those two things, then you have the opportunity to quarantine that animal at home. And that applies to animals that bite someone on the owner's property, on the animal owner's property. Okay, so hopefully that reduces the number of animals that we have to take up limited quarantine space in the shelter. Okay, so thank you everyone for your indulgence for me going over time. How about for the Q&A? I love everybody just raising their hands. If we get everyone raising their hands at once, we have the option of, we can form a line in the center if we'd like to, or off to the side, but I think we can just handle that kind of organically as we go along. Okay, and have there been any questions yet, Ashley? Anything?
Yes, there's been one.
I'm asking, I don't know what type of activity we may be getting over Twitter, so I've just asked her to let me know.
We're live tweeting and getting questions as we go along. And one question is from Lindsay Scoville. And her question is, can you explain how the proposed changes to 6-26 would would affect rescue group dog feeders?
Right, so 6-26, 126 rather,
6-1.
is one of those sections where we have certain situations where we need to be able to take action and encourage someone to stop doing what they're doing because they're either imposing on the property rights of someone else, or they're creating a risk to public safety. Most often, those things are not caused by folks that are feeding as part of a rescue operation. There have been a few incidents where that has occurred, but essentially what we have is, and this existed before really with the causing a congregation clause in 6-22, you have folks who have the best of intentions, who are trying to solve what seems like an insurmountable problem. But they may be doing it in a way that is, take for example, there was a woman who was, again, best of intentions. She was feeding, I think it was 6 or 7 dogs. She was happening to do it at a movie theater. And the property owner of that movie theater called us and said, look, I've got families walking across this parking lot, and I have a woman who's coming onto my property and feeding animals, and because of the fact that she's feeding them on a regular basis, they are congregating here. It doesn't work. So we needed to take action in that case. But I think that is the most acute example that comes to my mind. We need to be pragmatic. I'm not giving a very Twitter answer.
I'm going to need 140 characters or less.
There isn't a Twitter answer for this. What we have is we have a conflict, and I think so long as we have such a massive stray animal population problem in Houston, this conflict is going to persist. But we have the need to be able to take action in some instances if people are being irresponsible. Thankfully, most people that operate with rescue groups are not doing that. So we know that we are going to be pragmatic in every instance that we can. So if we can encourage people to maybe coordinate their activities more tightly with the rescue group to get that animal into foster care as opposed to staying out on the streets, and get it into a home ultimately, that's where we'd like to go. But we are not going to use this. None of the things that we're proposing is a backhanded or backdoor way for us to be able to attack the activities of what are very important people and very noble people doing absolutely essential work. That is still not a Twitter answer, but it's the best that I've got.
Thank you.
Can I go to Lisa first?
First of all, great job. I mean, I know you guys have worked years on this and working with, our groups and other concerned, stakeholders as well. Just to touch base on this one, though, there really should be some sort of language that does protect if you're acting upon or with a 501c3 to offer that protection, because sometimes it takes more, because here's where you're going to get some, it's kind of double speak, but I don't have the actual ordinance in front of me, is sometimes it takes more than 3 days to win over the confidence of that particular cat or dog,
right,
to get it to safety.
Right.
And then now with that particular law, though, it says that now I'm the owner of that particular stray.
And I would say that it's really important to emphasize that you have to look at 6-22 also.
Okay.
Because and I'll read you what 6-22 says, or what we're recommending that it says. So 6-22 currently says, the title is Congregations of Unconfined and Unlicensed Stray Cats and Dogs. This is what is current. It shall be unlawful for any person intentionally to cause, suffer, or permit the maintenance of an attractive environment for the assembly of a congregation of unconfined and unlicensed stray cats or dogs by the placement of dog food or cat food. For purposes of this section, a congregation of unconfined and unlicensed stray cats or dogs means any 3 or more dogs or cats which may of their own volition enter or leave the lot, tract, or parcel of land upon which it is placed, are not wearing valid city license tags issued pursuant to Article 4 of this chapter, and are not subjected to a trap, neuter, or return program approved by the director. Finally, for purposes of this section, cat food or dog food means any commercially prepared cat or dog food or any other, this is all what currently exists. I'm getting to the new part. Or any other food item or product which is subject to consumption by dogs and cats, it shall be an affirmative defense that the dogs or cats were feral, which is meaning untamed. Oh yeah, I forget.
The dog can't
Untamed.
be feral, so TNR only applies typically to cats, not necessarily dogs.
So
True.
feral, and that the person placed the food solely for the purpose of apprehending stray cats and dogs and delivering them to BARC or a humane organization, or to vaccinate them against rabies and license them, or, this is new, or delivering them to a licensed veterinarian for sterilization as part of a trap, neuter, and return program approved by the director. So I think we're trying, we absolutely, we've got some DNR performance statistics that we can talk about if anybody's interested. We blew last year out of the water. Next year we want to blow this year out of the water. We know that that is something that we want to encourage and we want more of. So we're trying to be sensitive to that. Really, guys, this kind of comes into, it really is those cases where somebody in a neighborhood somewhere is causing an animal that's a problem for the neighborhood, meaning it's chasing folks down the street, it's chasing folks at the bus stop, and they are causing that animal to be there, but they're saying it's not my dog. But it is, so that's what it is.
But here's where you're gonna fall. If you.
So let me say this, I would love.
So the words don't come
Sure.
as naturally or as quick as they used to. But what I fear is with those types of changes, you're going to punish the animal versus punish the irresponsible owner
Right.
or person doing that, because all they have to say is, that's not my dog. And then what happens to that dog? It gets taken to BARC and gets put down.
Good.
So, you know, it's one of those things where there has to be a part where we have to educate the public that there
Yep.
are resources, this
Yep.
is the way to handle that kind of thing
No doubt.
before, you know.
So how about this? I agree. The last thing that we want to do is make it more difficult for rescues and fosters to do what they do. We'll go back and look at that at the section. If you guys have ideas for language that we might, things that we might do, please send them to me. Okay? Because we'd love to get them. So we'll look at it. We'll get back to you guys. I agree. I think our intents are aligned. If we could make a revision.
And the other thing to remember with this particular change is it does allow us to address the people that are the root of the problem rather than the animal. Without this change, we don't have any way of addressing someone, and it goes back to exactly what you just said. It's not my dog.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Levy. I'm on the board of Friends for Life, and I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity. Before directly making some suggested changes in the ordinance, I did want to take this opportunity to express Friends for Life extreme appreciation for BARC's support of TNR in zip code 77009 as part of the Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets initiative. And our organization is looking forward to continuing the spay, neuter, and TNR program across the city of Houston in partnership with BARC. So thank you very much for that.
Could I just interject just briefly before you begin your questions? I want to say that the Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets initiative is something that we have wanted to do for quite some time, and there's no way we would have been able to do it without the partnership of Friends for Life and SNAP and the various community organizations that are partnering with us to make this a success. I think that the partnership and the growing relationship is almost more exciting than the services that we're providing and the impact that we're having in an area of high need. So Friends for Life is absolutely invaluable. Thank you very much. So.
Back at you, long thanks for all that. So anyway, moving on, we would like to suggest just a couple of changes in your language. And in 6.1c, that's the definition of feral. It may just be an English language issue, but we would suggest that we use the language untamed domestic cat, just dropping the word homeless altogether. Did you say homeless or? And makes it confusing. Just say untamed domestic cat as a feral cat. Okay.
But we would like to actually include the homeless cats in there as well, because there's a lot of feral cats that have been socialized.
Right.
And we want to be able to include those in the TNR program.
Then you might want to use, and I would like for you to use the term free roaming rather than feral. Because feral, I think most people would agree, refers to the unsocialized, to humans, domestic cat. Whereas the stray can very well be a perfectly tame kitty cat that just happens to be homeless. So if you use the term free roaming, and that actually free roaming can include owned cats, unfortunately.
Sure.
Free roaming then would include all the cats that we believe should be caught up in a spay-neuter and TNR program so that we really can bring overpopulation under control. So we would love that, but I didn't want to go that far, but free roaming would be preferred, okay, for us. In section 3, section 6-3B2, what we would like to see is language that includes, and we can send you this specifically if you would like it, a feral or stray cat that has been subjected to a trap, neuter, and return program approved by the director. Here's the new part. Or a feral or stray cat that is part of a planned or ongoing trap, neuter, and return program approved by the director. This language just recognizes the fact that TNR programs typically do not have a very clean start and a very clean ending time. In fact, the best TNR programs, you're constantly vigilant for the new arrival, and you know who the new arrival is, and you trap him in and take him off to get him fixed. And we're thinking that a planned program could be covered as a colony manager has said affirmatively, hey, I'd love to do this. They just need help from Friends for Life, BARC, some organization to help them with traps and maybe helping with the actual labor, because it's very labor intensive, as you guys know, to trap cats and transport them. So it just broadens it a little bit to recognize that, hey guys, we know this takes time, we know this is a lot of work.
Okay.
You're all under our tent as long as you're talking the TNR language and you're walking the TNR talk.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you for excluding dogs and cats in section 6-7A. And we actually in 622 3 we're suggesting the same language that we suggested for 6-3, and that is the ongoing or planned, so that you don't necessarily get people turned off to the idea that TNR is going to protect them from some of these feeding activities. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great.
I'm going to add 2 more friendly amendments. My name is Margie Harris. I'm a private citizen. I'm just a volunteer for Friends for Life and working on the Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets initiative. The 2 friendly amendments I have are that
I think, can we say, we'll go ahead and receive all amendments as friendly.
Too many rules, Robert's Rules of Order meetings that I've been in. 6-137 A1 and 6-137G talks about mandatory sterilizations, and I think there's an exception in there right now for animals that are not yet of age to be sterilized. Right. I would ask that be expanded a bit to include animals for whom it is medically inadvisable for them to be sterilized.
That's in there already.
They can be too old, they can have a heart condition, whatever it is, and just the...
Yeah, that's existing now. That's in there.
So I didn't see that in there. Great, that's wonderful. The other is 694B about rabies vaccinations and evidence of that. We now have a 3-year rabies vaccination. So I'd like you to consider that instead of just having every year needing a new certificate.
Yeah, we do accept the 3-year vaccination. The city license is still 1 year, and that's something that's
And we'll make that adjustment eventually, you know, I mean, as soon as we brought pet licensing back in-house, we just had to sort of get the process cleaned down from where it was before. And I agree with, I mean, as I've been told, you know, if you can get a subscription to a magazine for 5 years, why can't you get a pet license?
Yeah.
But we'll work it out,
God,
we
I
will.
love that, yes.
Yeah, but we have accepted the 3-year for a couple of years now.
Yeah. But people get the license and the rabies license or certificate confused because they're not educated in
That's right.
that these are two separate
We've
things.
got plans for that.
So, yeah, no, please, take my money, I will prepay for the life of my pet. So,
And you're not the only one. And the great thing is that any money that you prepay for the life of your pet stays right at Bark to support things.
Oh, that's
It goes
awesome.
out the streets.
That's great.
So,
I had a
Yes,
third
ma'am.
thing, which is to consider establishing some kind of stipend or sliding scale for people who have to have their pets sterilized. There's a lot of low-income people who don't do that because even though SNAP provides low prices, it's still too expensive for some folks.
So repeat that for me?
I'd like the city to consider establishing some kind of stipend or sliding scale for the charges for sterilization of animals because low-income people can't afford it.
The mandatory standards.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the sterilization would be at the owner's expense, but it could be at the place of their choosing. We're not in the business of doing mass sterilization for the public,
Oh, I
only for the
understand.
animals that are in the shelter.
I understand. I just think, and I'm not saying this can be fixed overnight, but we need to have a way to provide financial help for people who aren't even able to afford the prices charged by, you know, nonprofit groups like SNAP, much less veterinarian provided services.
There are though, they do offer free services, rabies and sterilization. You are on
Income
government assistance and they're able to give that to the SNAP local.
And we pay SNAP to provide those
So-
services. Yeah, Nick, Hannah from Sapient. Not sure what Eric's Health after they've rebranded. We still have the gold. But thank you for the suggestions.
I have a question, isn't, I'm sorry, my name is Julie Dow, and I'm a manager at a dog daycare. I thought that BARK already is involved in a kind of a pilot program in certain zip codes where there's low income for people to take their pets to get them spayed at no cost. Is that true?
That's what we were referring to when we were talking about the Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets
Okay.
initiative.
All right.
That's right. It's in the near north side. We've been in the neighborhood since July. We're having our next big event actually at Marshall Middle School, the SNAP Mobile Clinic and the Friends for Life mobile adoption vehicle. It's going to be in the parking lot of Marshall Middle School starting at 6 o'clock.
This Saturday.
Wow.
So we're trying, we've got Kim Kimmy, a wonderful volunteer with Friends for Life, and Mercedes Sanchez and Councilmember Gonzalez's office are leading the block walking effort for that, and they're trying to make sure that those trucks are full. Yeah. So that's going on right now, and trying to learn as much as we can. Is that it, Jim? Is that all?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Lisa?
Regarding 120, which I'm so pleased about the non-commercial breeding, and I think, you know, I brought this up to you guys when we met a couple of years ago. I pulled the Chronicle ads and showed that there were over 800 for sale pets ads. You know, I was just shocked at that. How will it be enforced? Will they, in order to place an ad, do you have to, in some cities, what they do is you have to turn in the breeder's license number
That is
in
a
order to
marvelous
even
idea.
place the ad.
That is a marvelous idea. So they interject themselves with, that is a really,
So, I mean, but how do we enforce that? I mean, is that?
that's an example of a soft, I think, indirect approach, but a very intelligent way to address that issue, and that is to go to their market. So, we'll definitely look at that.
So that's working.
So we have that option, which is to work with the folks that provide that advertising medium for these individuals. Chris, jump in, I would say another thing is to just check Craigslist and Google and that type of thing.
Exactly.
But let's be clear, and you can talk, Chris, if you want, about how vast the difference is between the needs and the available resources to address them. We've got 6 or 7 guys on the street on any one day to respond to 624 square miles. We get about 250 calls for service every day. That includes bite cases, that includes requests from HPD to help them serve warrants and that type of thing. Aggressive animals on school grounds.
Christopher, we're approaching 400 a day at this point.
Oh, superb. Wonderful. So, Chris, if you want to add to that at all. Please.
Well, the main thing with that is we require a lot of clerical staff that we don't have access to at this point. And it's something that we've talked about before in utilizing volunteers to screen some of this. But active field officers for BARC, we have a total of 18, and that includes 2 senior officers that spend most of their time inside the facility. So we don't have the bandwidth to do a lot that way, but it's something that we'd like to encourage with volunteers, with interns, with more expanded use of services that don't involve us using our field officers, and then the field officers would do the actual verification.
But if this goes through and gets passed, there's no reason that we can't appeal to the Chronicle. They'll be our partners.
We could send a short memo. Look, this is the problem that we have. These people are contributing to it. We'd appreciate it if you would help us address it. That's a great suggestion.
You know, one of the other things, though, in working with the volunteers, just to point out who doesn't have the licensing, yada, yada, yada. I mean, this generates revenue for our animals, the fines to non-commercial breeders.
Well,
and
what
also
are the fines? What are the penalties for this?
It's the usual animal fine is $112, what they call the window fee. The actual fines are set by the judge. The cites that we write are simply summons to appear in court. The fines are actually decided by the judge, unless you think it's too much of a bother to go to court and just want to pay the window fee. So they're limited to a maximum, and that's one of the reasons why we're adjusting some of this nuisance and aggressive and things.
So
that we can
basically you want to
improve
pass a
that.
law that really you guys can't even enforce and doesn't really address the problem.
Well, the
Because,
non-commercial.
well, I'm a trainer. We do performance work. There are a lot of people who will have litter of puppies that are performance dogs. They're not necessarily breeders, but they may have a dog and decide to have a litter of puppies because they have performed so well. And my daughter has a dog that was given to her by such a breeder who now has several titles, just recently got a UKC agility title, and several titles in rally and obedience. And that just seems kind of
No, you pay a license fee.
restrictive.
Just all you
So,
do
but
is
she didn't charge for any of these puppies.
No,
I
she's
don't-
still breeding.
She's still
breeding.
breeding.
She's breeding.
She's
and
still
under the-
breeding,
guys,
but she's not a commercial breeder.
Let's keep it.
And so
let's keep
basically, you guys have no way, I mean, these dogs were never advertised for, these were all done through friends that she met in competition. I just think it's
challenging.
kind of dumb to create a law that you can't really enforce.
Fair enough.
I don't know,
Fair enough.
that's just me, I guess, but, yeah. I think it just doesn't solve the problem, yet it will.
I agree with you. None of
Yeah,
what
but you
we're.
said that before, so.
Yeah, I'll probably say it several other times tonight. None of what.
So it's just kind of a feel-good thing.
What?
No, it's a
The
tool.
law.
It's a tool that we have that will be able to address a lot of these issues out there with the resources that we have. Currently, we don't have a tool to
Everybody who
use.
comes in to drop off dogs, you can find them at BARC. I mean, because I can't figure out any other way, I guess, so, because you said you can't go on Craigslist, you don't have the
No.
manpower, you know,
I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And I think what I heard Chris say was that there are different. We have direct enforcement action that we can take via animal control activity. We have indirect methods. Direct but not carried out by animal control officers available to us, such as using different resources besides animal control officers to try to address that concern. But I hear where you're coming from. It is a challenge.
Working dogs are important dogs.
Say that again.
Working dogs, people don't necessarily breed for warm, fuzzy pets. I just think it puts a burden on people who are being responsible and not commercial breeders. And yet you guys are basically saying you've got people who you're gonna have to get people narc on other people
Well-
to make this law.
I don't know about that. I think there's enough information available. For instance, all the Craigslist ads that say free to a good home. They're talking about they're probably not free. Right? They're probably just not disclosing their rehoming fee. But look, I agree with you that this doesn't solve the problem. Nothing that we're proposing here solves the problem. The problem that we face is massive. We do not solve any of the problems that we have legislatively. We don't. What we do, though, is we attempt to put some tools in place that, as we gain more resources available at our disposal, we have smart tools that aren't capturing too many people, that aren't arbitrary to the extent that we can change them, to be able to change behavior in some way. Now, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I think we may just have to agree to disagree on this point, and that's fair enough. I'm not saying that to be dismissive. I appreciate where you're coming from, and we will visit it again. I assure you. But let's not. I don't think we're kidding ourselves. That we think. I'll be right with you, man. That we think any of this is going to fulfill our dream of every animal that crosses our threshold gets in a new home tomorrow. It's not going to happen. It's going to take blood, sweat, and tears to make that happen, and it's probably going to take years to do it. But this at least removes some obstacles that we don't want in our way. Stop. We don't need to have a rule on the books that makes us quarantine an animal in our facility when it could be quarantined at home, because that makes sense. We don't need to be wasting animal control officers' times processing permits or administering things or answering questions about permits that haven't been issued in 10 years. We don't need to have laws that are on the books that make our rescues and folks that participate in TNR program unnecessarily concerned about whether or not they're at risk. None of those solve the problems that we have. But they're all necessary conditions to be able to put us on a path towards solving the problem, I think. But again, I appreciate where you're coming from that, and we will definitely revisit that clause. Yes, ma'am.
To our attorney over here, what is an ordinance? Give me the definition of an ordinance, please.
It's a law propagated by the city.
Okay, so now we are dealing with the law, correct, with this ordinance? We are dealing with the law?
I hope so.
Okay. In here you have terminology saying unlawful. However, in your talk, it's your wish, your want, your desire, a very whitewashed approach to some of the issues that face the 1.2 million dogs on the street of Houston.
Dogs and cats.
Dogs and cats.
Yes, ma'am.
1.2 million growing every day. And the new law ordinance that you're proposing to put us on a path to remedy some of this, in which many 501c3s and individuals donate their time, money, energy, heartache, and everything to help this city go forward with this massive problem that we have. So the whitewashed approach to this is somewhat offensive to many people. Now, I don't know what city you live in. It could be River Oaks, it could be Sugar Land, but there's many communities out here that have devastating effects of loose and stray animals. Heartbreaking, crime, heartbreaking, crime, cruel, inhumane, chained out in a yard at 30 degrees in the rain. Where is your ordinance addressing any of these problems?
It's in here.
Yeah, I think
It's in there for breeders and kennels. It's not in there for individuals.
Okay, guys, I'd like everyone has the floor, and they can address us just we can get emotional very, very quickly.
No,
Any of
but-
us, so just keep the conversation going one way.
That's what I'm asking. This is an ordinance. It is a law that
Right.
you're trying to pass.
Right.
Make it a comprehensive law to address not only the animals in your care and the animals on the street, but you need to address the problem of the ignorant people.
Well,
So that needs to be a fine. That needs to go to jail. That means to have a registry. That means it all.
right, okay, thank you. I think that part of what you're appealing for us to do, we have attempted to do, which is give our enforcement officers some new tools to be able to address offenses that are going on, that they just don't have a good lever that they can pull to be able to interfere with that activity. So I'm talking about the aggressive dog and the public nuisance dog declarations. So many times an issue might be able to be addressed if we had an appropriate way, an efficient way to be able to just have someone fix their fence. We don't have that now. The public nuisance designation would get us there.
No, it kills the pet. It doesn't rehabilitate the ignorant person.
Tell me again?
If you pick it up and the pet is exterminated, you're not rehabilitating the ignorant person.
No, none of those designations require us to impound the animal. None. Now, if we're talking about an aggressive dog, this is a designation. It's like the dangerous dog designation. If a dog causes severe bodily injury or harm to a person, the dangerous dog process is initiated, and then the hearing officer that's presiding over that process determines that dog needs to be designated as dangerous. It doesn't have to be put down, but hang on one second. But if it's going to live, then the owner needs to do different things, like make sure that the animal doesn't run at large anymore. They face increased penalties for that, and this is anywhere in the state of Texas, right?
Yeah, it's
Says you have
insurance,
to have
it's
an insurance
enclosures.
policy.
Yeah, dangerous dog does include that.
Yeah, you have to have an insurance policy. I don't see it in there.
It's already in the
I
law.
would ask you, ma'am, I
Not a
hear,
change.
I know, I just spoke with Ms. Martin last week. I know, and I hear from council offices every single day, and so does Ashton. We speak to constituents all the time about the vast number of communities that just can't, even if they wanted to lift themselves up, they couldn't because they've got so many stray animals that are there. I would ask that I think we are improving the tools that we have to be able to respond to that issue. These are laws. It is by definition kind of prescriptive and more directed towards law enforcement, just because that's what laws do. But we're not only improving the tools that we've got in those areas. The Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets initiative is designed to address that issue as well. I don't think we can do any one thing and expect that everything's going to get better. So I would just ask that I think that we've done some of the things that you're asking us to do. Perhaps it might be more evident, and I know that 66 pages is a lot to read, but if you take a look at the draft that we've got online, I think that we've done some of the things that you're requesting. If you disagree with me, please follow up with me after the fact, and I'd be happy to talk more about where we're still falling short. Julie, because this is on
I
the floor.
think what I'm hearing her ask about, of course, we all know about the stray animal problem. And in my opinion, we live in a state that is just barely catching up to the urbanization and growth development of a huge city like Houston that's constantly changing. New people come, more pets. But perhaps what it sounds like, my question is, does BARC have access to maybe volunteers, or has BARC hired or considered hiring anyone or a group of persons to actually do that kind of liaison, like educating, just going out to talk to neighborhoods where the problem where the problems are the worst?
Short answer is yes.
Good. Okay.
And we haven't done it in the past. Tried to, but again, that's one aspect of Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets initiative that's going on right now in just around the community. But education is a huge part of that. It's a long-term, both of those are kind of long-term ways to address the problem. They don't address, unfortunately, the short-term acute problem that we have, which is too many animals roaming the streets and too many animals coming to park. But they're still, again, necessary. So we have Councilmember Gonzalez's office that is doing that with all the Friends for Life volunteers and Unity for a Solution volunteers, and the different volunteers for the civic associations that are involved in that area. Councilmember Davis, we recently had a meeting with, he's going to kind of replicate that piece in Kashmir Gardens. So we're working with him to develop that for Kashmir. And it's really, we have the material that we can use. There are curricula out there. BARC may not have the resources available internally to be able to put boots on the ground in the street and spend half a day walking in that area. But council offices do, and civic associations do. We have the ability to put material in their hands to be able to start to address this issue, and then we can work in different ways. So the answer is yes, not near to the scale that we need to have, but we're on that trajectory. And the good news, I think, is that BARC is at a place where we're starting to get some support from some new partners. Healthy Pets, Healthy Streets is being funded entirely by private contributions. There are new folks that are coming forward to support us in different ways, and I think that's going to continue, I hope, as we start to advertise the successes that we're having in the form of evidence. I think more people are going to want to support that type of thing, to include council members at budget time. We're kind of starting to show what we can do given the people that we have and the capabilities that we have at BARC. I think we're close to tipping. We need to tip a lot to get to where we need. I'm going to go right here, Lisa, and then I'll come back to you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Catherine Project, I'm the Rural Cat Assistance Program Manager, and I actually was wondering about adding something to some of the new revisions, and that would be under the city licensing. It doesn't have an exemption for feral cats, and I love everybody at work, but we've had a lot of problems with licensing of colonies previously where paperwork's all gone, and we do thousands every year. And it's just one of those things, now we're backtracking, trying to get people to relicense their colonies. And of course, to update it every year, you have to show proof of vaccinations.
Sure.
Which most of the time,
Catch it.
30 years anyways, we're, lifespan 7 years, ABMA say the last 7 years, so that would be my question.
Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, the rabies shot, yeah, that is true. I got mine 10 years ago, and it's still valid. But the feral cat colonies, the way it's set up now is not a situation where the individual cats have to have a city license as much as they be part of the program. And a lot of the TNR program comes through the enforcement side, where we find these people. A lot of it comes from people like you that are doing the outreach to them. But no, the vaccination, we require that the animals be vaccinated. We don't have any requirement at this point that they be revaccinated, because we simply understand that you're not going to be able to round up those cats easily. They're a lot smarter than you would, than you may believe. They're not going to just walk into the trap and go get themselves a shot. So we're trying to be practical about it. We understand the reasoning.
Okay, yeah, because I was just, when it says, every year in the ordinances, that's kind of like, and I know we're licensing colonies, not exactly individual cats,
Right.
but a lot of our trappers feel it's kind of just one more step or one more thing they have to do, especially when they're helping hundreds of people every month.
And the TNR program has been a work in progress. It's something that nobody has attempted on this scale before. And we think it's come a long way. Our coordinator now is a lot more responsive than the people that were there in the past. And the enforcement side is a lot more aware of the feeding, and we've worked a lot with different colonies to try to improve them.
Thank you. I'm gonna come back to you next. No, I'm gonna go here, here, and Dr. Cooper. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I have a question about the new fostering restriction. Bark and 501c3s are always bleeding for fosters. Everybody needs fosters more and more, and they never have enough. My question to you is regarding the random inspection of foster homes. Is there any notification required whatsoever? Or it's just show up at your door?
Help me with the section, guys.
Well, the inspection just allows us to check on complaints that we're getting on certain areas. It's a little counterproductive to let people know that they're going to be inspected for a possible cruelty violation. So it's kind of a gray area there. We're not intending to go banging on fosters' doors and just arbitrarily toss their belongings.
So is there language that says it will only do an inspection based on a previously received complaint?
Well,
Otherwise people will expect you to.
everything is basically nuisance driven as far as the inspections are going to go, and that includes the fosters. So if we have a complaint or we have reason to believe through things that we've noticed with the fosters themselves or with the animals that are coming and going, if we have reason to believe that we need an inspection, then we'd like to be able to do that.
So like we have to put in the law.
Yeah.
And things that we know what the guidelines are for receiving an
It's so
inspection.
ambiguous that nobody's quite sure to say, well, this is how we're gonna use it now. Well, why not put it in the law that we will do,
We wanna have a
unannounced
little-
inspections? You wanna have
Yeah.
one?
We want to have a little bit of flexibility in how we do the enforcement. We want to be able to make sure that we can address different things, and you make things like inspections a little bit more vague so that you can adapt to different situations as we need to.
Okay, so basically, you're saying if you wanted to, you could just go up to a foster's.
If we
And
have
you
reason
wanna
to
keep
believe
that
that there's
as
a
a-
violation.
So first, I think.
Well, I'm concerned about the wording of the laws, and like the first one that was brought up, you couldn't even explain it clearly. And so if it's so ambiguous that you can't explain it to us clearly, then I think it needs to be written in such a way that it is very clear. All this vague gray area in laws just creates a whole lot of problems. Say what you mean and how you're gonna use it.
Which one specifically were you referring to?
Pardon?
Which one specifically were you referring
Oh,
to?
I can't remember the numbers or anything, I just remember he was trying to explain this law and just kind of couldn't, and was like, well, we're probably gonna use it this way and do this.
Non-commercial.
And, no, that's not what I'm talking about, it was not my question.
Oh, you're talking about the ownership.
Like I said, I can't remember. But because I was focusing on your inability to explain exactly what the consequences as it was written.
Okay,
were.
we're good.
Yeah, that's my question. So my only concern is, as a family, we're very committed to helping the animal community in any way, absolutely, that we can. Literally, we pour our hearts out and our pockets out for animals.
Right.
But we would not, and I know there are many, many private citizens like us who would not sign up for anything that would allow people to invite themselves into our home,
You're
period.
basically giving up Fourth Amendment rights because you guys are part
So,
of the government.
okay.
So that's what you're asking people.
I
So
would
we're
just
good.
like some protection,
Yeah.
as a private citizen who is signing up to foster, and I would abide by your policies, whatever they are laid out to me, but I would like a little more clarity on what the circumstances under which are, and if there is any notification, or at least a little bit of notification that an inspection is due to me.
Okay.
I mean,
We can visit that.
I think, go ahead.
foster shouldn't have to suspend their Fourth Amendment rights.
To keep
No
it
doubt,
kitty
and
cat
thank you.
until it gets a home.
Ma'am, I got it. I know where you're coming from, I promise. That's not the feeling that we want anyone to
But it's
walk.
the-
You're whitewashing it, it's
It's the
this
law.
wording, that's not how we feel, that's not how we
Okay,
want,
I'm
you know,
gonna
you keep
ask you-
interrupting everybody, so don't interrupt me.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
gonna ask you to
so-
hang on. I'm gonna ask you to hang on, to say that that's the last feeling that we want to impart to anyone. So let's go back and we'll look at that. That's not, we don't have the ability to oppose on your Fourth Amendment rights. That's guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. We're a local government. We cannot do that. But let's go back and we'll take a look at the language. We've got your concerns on tape, so we'll be able to look at them again, and we can send out some other suggestions. Please feel free to provide them to us too.
And this is why we have the meetings.
That's right.
So we can get the feedback and we can get the impressions. We're not going to do any illegal searches. You know, we're well aware of the Fourth Amendment.
Right, but you're asking them, you're saying, if you want to be a foster, then you will have to
And
do this. And I think that what you're saying is that it's going to scare away so many people that.
Which is not what
And we can go back, we can go back and look at the language.
But that's not what the law says.
Right, we're gonna go back and look at the language, all right? And then what we'll do is even if afterwards we can get your contact information, right? Maybe you can send us, you know, what you really wanted it to say. And we can look and see if there's suspicion of cruelty, or if there's suspicion of mistreatment, or if there's suspicion of whatever, then we can go out to your home,
the
right?
fact of the matter is that we have
Which-
an facility
right
now.
Yeah, we do.
Thankfully, we haven't had to use it very often. I can almost think of a couple of examples that come to mind. But we don't want to dissuade anyone from fostering.
That's correct.
That's not what we
You
want.
have that ability if you have a reason to believe there's a crime
Right.
being
Yeah,
committed.
reason
But
to-
but that's not what this law is saying.
And I think what we're saying is, we're gonna look at the language, we hear what you guys are saying.
Yeah,
We don't want anyone to read that and feel what you guys are feeling, okay? So, I'm gonna write my email address up. This goes for any suggestions that anybody has, please email it to me. But if anybody has suggestions on this specifically, if you guys do, send it to us, but we'll send out some revised language when we come up, okay? So are we good on that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. And Dr. Cooper and then Mr.
My name is Charlotte Bennett. I'm with the Greater Houston German Shepherd Dog Rescue. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for doing all of this. This is just an amazing amount of work. And kudos to everyone and for all the
Thank you.
work you have done.
Thank you guys for coming over.
What I was asked to come to, I didn't realize it was going to be on these specific ordinances, but I was asked to come to find out when dogs are going to rescues, that the chain of ownership should be broken. We have faced some very lengthy and arduous suits, and right now as I understand, we would be able to pull a dog, we would be able to spend $10,000 resurrecting the dog, which is not an uncommon situation, and place the dog in a good and loving home, and then an owner come back and say, that's my dog, and then within 2 years possibly have to hand that dog back after paying for a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So the idea is there really should be some kind of definition of when the ownership chain has been broken. And I didn't know if you all were addressing that or not. If not, I have some language written by another municipality, which is strong.
I'd love to see it.
It's before the state right now, is where it's sitting right now. And we are, just for the record purpose, we're opposed to that, you know, I mean, I think that once the ownership changes, it's done.
Yeah,
I
and
understand.
in the current ordinances right now, under the disposition of animals in 137, there is a provision that if an animal is adopted from the animal control agency, the owner has 30 days in which to claim it, okay? So if they want to claim it, they have to pay double what the person incurred. After 30 days, the owner has no more legal right to the dog.
I mean, I know that they're appealing to the state now for that right now. I mean, from our stance, we are opposed to that. I mean, because it would be very detrimental to the way we do our business. If you will. We would, it would be hard for us to be able to make an adoption plea, if you will. If this is not upheld, it's in the state right now. You know, I've already spoken to legal, and there's and talking about, you know, I've told them at our, we are against that altogether, so they're going to put that out to the state, and makes it very easy.
I think we've got to pay attention to the decisions and the opinions that are being made. And I think this is one of those issues that's in flux.
I mean, we know that there's a case that was just one, you know, an appeal case that was just one in terms of against the rescues. That's all being worked on. You got it. I mean, it's not good.
I'd love to see the language that you have. I don't know. We'll have to talk with. I'm not sure how we navigate those waters, given that there's pending action at different levels. It's one of those things that we know that I think we just got to see how it sorts out. If we can influence it.
Every major city in the state is against it.
They have the same problem. That's why instead of all the different ones having their own language, like Houston, which we have language that is very antiquated, and you're doing what you're doing now to upgrade your language. They have even smaller places that they have to cope with, and it seems like it should be dealt with the larger municipalities working in conjunction with the state, just to have a state law, and then that's what is adopted, and that's what.
I agree.
We agree, and I'd love to see the language.
Thank you for your time.
My name's Pat Cooper. I'm with Treat 'em Right Rescue, which is a pit bull rescue. And from what I hear tonight, it sounds like there might be a possibility that we would feel comfortable moving our shelter back into the city limits.
I hope so. The idea.
Yeah, I didn't feel comfortable within the city limits before.
I hope.
That's good to hear.
Okay.
We'll welcome you back.
Okay. And you talked about cruelty.
Yes, ma'am.
Most of our dogs are cruelty cases.
That's right.
When an owner turns in a dog that's obviously been mistreated, now do they have charges filed against them? Or do they go on the cruelty list?
Well, we do follow up on cases where we believe that there was cruelty on the part of the owner. Right now, the other animal control manager and I are going through the process of being nationally certified for the cruelty investigations. Cruelty is a penal code violation, so we work with HPD in getting warrants and things of that nature to follow up on. But all of our officers are getting the training, so we'll have a little bit more ability to recognize this. And yes, we do follow up. If we see an animal's been mistreated, the front office staff is excellent on notifying us of that kind of incident where the animals come in and we do think that there is something there. And we do follow up on those.
If they turned the animal in, their charges were dismissed, right?
Well, that was more of a case where they would avoid citation by turning the animal over.
Right.
We've stopped that procedure.
Okay, good.
You still get the citation whether you turn the animal in or not. Our focus is to encourage people to retain their animals. And that's what a lot of this is about with the aggressive dog and the nuisance dog.
Right.
We don't want you to turn the dog in because you're going to get a ticket. We want you to learn how to keep the dog legally, and so you don't become a nuisance to your neighbors. And so a lot of the actual enforcement, what you think of us as banging on your door and giving you a ticket, is educational. We're trying to get people to keep their animals. We're trying to return animals to the owner. So that's why we're encouraging the microchip and the licensing as well.
Well, I would hope that those people that brought dogs that were obviously starved and mistreated could not walk back into Bark and adopt an animal.
They can.
They can't.
Okay.
No.
It's,
we get a lot of heat for that already for people who want to adopt again, you know.
If you guys are interested, we can. Taryn Hutchins is here with us. She runs. She's our adoption counselor, and she also manages the front desk staff. So, if you'd like to hear about it, Taryn, do you want to talk a little bit at all about the things that we do? Like if you turn in an animal with us, so do you?
Yeah, that was one of my. When I came on as adoptions coordinator, that was one of my strongest beliefs is, that specific case, that people could turn in an animal and walk over. So now we have a system in place where they are flagged in the system. Notes are added appropriately because not every case, we have these situations where they're considered an owner just because they've been feeding it. So we don't want to penalize people for the wrong thing. So the front, we work with the customer service people in the front to gather as much information as possible so that we can make well-rounded decisions if people come back at some point. But we are also working with the vet tech staff that work at the animals more closely, so all the feedback comes back from them about the condition of the animal and that they're marked appropriately. We search by address, name, ID number, birth date, and we search by everything we can to make sure we're looking for those people in the system and consider their whole household, not just the person. I mean, obviously, if someone really wants to, there's ways around it. But we've done everything we can within our power to try to prevent that. We also work with our volunteers and staff if they hear things in the adoption building to make sure that information comes to the front so that we can make the right decisions as best we can.
I mean, the bottom line is, Doctor, if we know that someone's been a bad person, they're not going to get another pet from us. They're just not. I mean, I go through this. I've gone through a number of people who try to work around me. And I deserve another pet. No, you don't. It just doesn't work that way. Nothing has to do with deserving. It's how it's the condition of the animal and how you behave with it. Like if you return an animal to me and you've made a decision that you can't take care of it, that you've made a decision and you've signed a document saying that that dog can be euthanized based upon your actions of returning the animal, you're not going to get another one. That's right. I mean, these things are practical and things that are applied
That's
every day.
reassuring.
It's tough sometimes because
It's
people
hard.
they get really nasty with me. I mean, it's not that I can't handle it, but I mean, it's just the way it is. It's not a second chance type of environment. You have to stop and think because a pet's a big responsibility and a big decision.
Steve, can
Can you talk about 6126, which is the ordinance regarding doggy daycares or pet care facilities? Because we've worked for the last 2 or 3 years on this one. And so I only got notice about this meeting today, so I know that there was another meeting where you discussed it. However, I was not privy to a lot of that information. Tell me a little bit more about this hearing process, because I see the language hearing officer versus a judge. Because I don't think a lot of people understand what that process is about. If you are ticketed for a violation, which you listed here, and this is kind of a two-parter.
Hearing officer process number 1.
So, talking about if you're issued a ticket, because I believe it's 3 tickets, or 3 convictions in 1 year, you can lose your license.
Convictions, and that's really important.
Okay.
Explain how convictions are done and how they're decided upon.
And how that's decided, yes, please. And then the other thing was, just as a pet owner, I mean, you took a lot of the information that we gave you and took that into account, and I can see that that's been kind of lumped in here. But just even as a pet owner, to not do inspections is troublesome. There's always the 80-20 rule, where you're right, 80% of the businesses out there are operating, on the up and up, and then, there are going to be a handful of people that, just want to pat the dogs, not give them, whatever. But there's not a way for owners to know to even call for a complaint. Because I talk to owners all day long, every day, of you can't believe what happened at the groomer, or you can't believe what happened at this doggy daycare kind of complaints.
That came up at the last meeting that we had.
I mean, are posters going to be put up like at a pharmacy? At a pharmacy it says, if you have any complaints, call this number. I mean, can licensed businesses also have that kind of plaque so that people know that, 1, I'm licensed, 2, where should I file a complaint if I don't like the way my animal is handled on their facility?
So we require taxi cabs and vehicles for hire to post inside their vehicles information on how to report a complaint. That's an interesting idea.
Very good.
So, yeah. So like that's an idea that we've lifted a lot. The hearing officer process, the due process provisions, I said were lifted from other sections of the code. So I think it's important first let's go back to the 4 kind of non-negotiables that I talked about before that can lead to a suspension or a revocation. Have to provide adequate food, shelter, water for the animal. You cannot commit animal cruelty, and you cannot operate the facility in such a way that it's going to create an environment that would that would encourage the transmission of disease, and then what you were describing, you can't have a play area or anything else essentially that causes a noise problem for your neighbors. We don't have the experience of having a lot of complaints on this issue. I can't think of one actually. I know that we've got businesses that operate like, Chris, you were saying 6 feet away, I think, from a living room, right? On dining room, excuse me. Well, we don't get noise complaints about that. But that's because they've invested a lot in their facility to create the noise. So how do you get to the suspension part on the noise issue? Because I think that's probably the most worrisome. If I were a commercial pet service provider, I would be most concerned about that provision, I think. Because I'd be able to provide excellent care to all my customers' animals. So what has to happen? This is really kind of you have to be a pretty bad actor to get to this threshold. You have to be, I don't know if you have to be negligent, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not negligent in the legal sense of the word, but what you have to do is you have to, first of all, BARC has to receive at least 3 complaints about someone that's about a location that's causing a noise problem. Then we have to go inspect that property and say, yeah, they're right. It is too loud. Chapter 30 is where the noise regulations are in our Code of Ordinances. We have to say, yeah, pursuant to the standards that are set out in Chapter 30, this is substantiated. I'm going to issue a citation. What has to happen then is that goes to the municipal courts department. The city prosecutor and the municipal courts department decide that they're going to prosecute that thing, and someone's convicted of one of those offenses pursuant to Chapter 30. That has to happen 2 more times before suspension or revocation comes into play. That is difficult to do. I think we've got some people in the room that could talk about how easy it is to reset a court date and to do that several times so that you can push the time out.
Hey, Chris, we just add one thing
Yeah.
right now about the fact that BARC is not, even though there's 3 that come through, it's not us as an entity that can shut you down.
Right.
Courts shut you down.
Right. Right. So that via the hearing. Right. So all of that has to occur to get to the 3 convictions, which I think is a pretty high bar and would take pretty egregious activity to get there. After that has occurred, the way that the hearing process works is we get notice. Chris and Jared probably would get notice. Okay, this is the 3rd time inside of this small window in 12 months that this has occurred. We need to recommend suspension of this license. So they're going to do their write-up. They're going to send written notice to the business owner that we're recommending that your license be suspended or revoked. This is when the date and time of the hearing is going to be. The hearing is actually administered by a hearing officer. That is someone that works not in our department at all. They work for the municipal courts department.
So it's not a judge?
No, they're administrative law judges in some cases. In other cases, they're not. They tend to have
in the hearing
legal training.
process.
I'm sorry.
The hearing process is pretty standardized throughout